Art has been a part of Schiphol for years on end. Sometimes obvious, sometimes subtle, these works inspire the millions of travelers who visit our airport every year on their journeys, whether they are arriving or departing. This podcast series, Art Moments Schiphol, introduces you to the stories behind the artworks, guided by the creators themselves. Let's take a look, shall we? In this episode, Shakuru Tajiri, grandson of famed Japanese-American sculptor and artist Shinkichi Tajiri, talks about his grandfather's work, The Meeting Point.
And Shinkichi wanted to create something that, was like a direct statement that anyone around the world would have a direct association or connection to seeing the work. And so he chose the knot as a symbol for this idea. And he said a knot is an object that you could place anywhere in the world, from the jungle in Brazil to Los Angeles. People will have an association. You don't have to like art or have an idea of art history to have an association with this.
A mother and child reunite after years apart. A business traveler races to their gate. A couple lingers, savoring a final embrace. Schiphol is more than just an airport. It's a crossroads. On any given day, almost 70,000 travelers may pass through the halls. Each one of these visitors brings with them their own stories. For over 50 years, one sculpture has been a silent witness to these.
My name is Shakuru Tajiri. I'm 30 years old. I'm a composer and visual artist, and I'm the grandson of Shinkichi Tajiri and Ferdi Tajiri Yonsa, my grandparents. And together with my parents, my auntie, and my sister, we run the Shinkichi Tajiri estate, and we're responsible for the legacies of both of my grandparents. We're here today to talk about the Meeting Point, which is a knot sculpture that my grandfather made in 1975, which is placed at the arrivals at Schiphol.
Navigating your way through this international hub is no small feat. Some artworks serve as landmarks, providing recognizable places to find your way back to each other. At the heart of Schiphol's arrivals hall stands Meeting Point, a large, bold knot. Smooth metallic curves catch the traveler's eye. A knot is a symbol recognized worldwide, but this specific one holds its own incredible story and was made by an equally incredible artist, Shinkichi Tajiri.
My grandfather was born on December 7th, 1923 in Watts, Los Angeles, California. He was a Nisei, so he was a first-generation Japanese that was born in the U.S., and his parents came from Japan. They were Issei's, so they immigrated to Japan at the start of the 1900s. He stayed in Los Angeles until he was about 12, and then they moved to San Diego. And then eventually, his 18th birthday, Pearl Harbor happened, which drastically changed and influenced his life.
Shinkichi Tajiri is a Japanese-American artist who eventually settled in Barlo, Limburg, right here in the Netherlands. His works are a testament to resilience. His story spans continents and disciplines. From sculpting to photography to film, his work constantly navigates the intersections of his Asian, American, and European identities.
Exactly on his 18th birthday, Pearl Harbor happened, and it was actually the start of what eventually became the Japanese-American internment. The U.S. government, they were afraid that there were maybe people within the Japanese-American and Japanese communities that were spies, and so they eventually decided to, quote-unquote, evacuate, but actually forcibly move 120,000 Japanese and Japanese-Americans into these internment camps, and my family was placed into an internment camp called Poston in Arizona, which, my family spent a couple of years. It was unclear what was going to happen to them. The days were very long. It was very hot, warm. Like the living conditions were very, very bad. And so he decided, at one point, the U.S. Army was recruiting for a segregated Japanese-American combat unit, which was called the 442nd, which actually became the most decorated Army unit in the U.S. Army. But they were recruiting for, and so that became sort of a way for my grandfather to sort of leave camp. And so he decided he would join the U.S. Army, which was quite ironic because it was, the country that locked up his family. And so that sort of tension, or at least sort of dynamic, always stayed throughout his life.
After enduring forced internment and discrimination in the United States, Tajiri made a life-changing decision to move to Europe, where he became a leading figure in the avant-garde art scene.
So my grandfather studied at the Art Institute in Chicago for a year before deciding to leave in self-imposed exile to Paris in 1948 because of the apparent racism that was still going on at the time against people of Japanese descent and Japanese Americans, because a lot of Americans still, they had a lot of casualties in the Pacific Theater, and a lot of Americans still saw, people of Japanese descent or as they had the face of the enemy. And so he was being discriminated, and he felt that he couldn't realize his potential in those conditions. And so when he got to Paris in 1948, he felt free. It was also the start of where he would eventually really sort of blew up as an artist. And he studied with Zadkine, and then he studied with Léger, but he left those schools because he felt he was being pushed too much to become like a copy of them. He was first painting, and then at one point he started making sculptures, which were these like warriors and samurai, which are very much inspired by his like recent war traumas and experiences. And it was a way to sort of purify and cleanse himself of the traumas of the war. Also in Paris, he eventually met my grandmother, Ferdi. He was involved with a lot of the Dutch artists there, so he got in touch with the Cobra movement.
The Cobra movement, which emerged in the late 1940s, emphasized free expression and the use of unconventional materials. Shinkichi Tajiri was one of the first artists to experiment with junk sculpture and gained recognition within this influential group alongside Dutch artists like Karel Appel, Constant Nieuwenhuis, and Corneille.
My grandmother was also in Paris for art. My grandfather taught her how to weld, and so that's when they fell in love, and eventually they moved to the Netherlands. So while he was in Amsterdam, he also realized that the size of his work was very much informed by the place that you lived in, or at least the dimensions that you had to work in. And so he wanted to find a place where he could produce bigger sculptures. And eventually my grandmother started driving around the Netherlands with my auntie and my mother in the backseat, looking for places to live. And through a friend, they found this like rundown castle in North Limburg in a little village called Barlo, and that's where eventually they moved to in 1962. And when they got there, it was this, like I mentioned, a very rundown. Like the last person that lived there was like 40 years before they got there, so it was pretty. It wasn't in a good shape, and maybe only like 15% of the place was livable, and the rest was just in a very bad state. And he spent the rest of his life sort of rebuilding it and making it his own sort of Gesamtkunstwerk.
Gesamtkunstwerk is a German term for a total work of art which combines multiple mediums or experiences into one singular whole.
And it's also the place where I was born, and it's the place where 3 generations of Tajiris have lived and worked, and it's still in our possession to this day, so it's a very special place.
Shinkichi Tajiri's work became a way to channel the weight of his past. When he settled in Barlo, it was not just a physical move, but a symbolic one. His monumental sculptures became even more imposing, with bold forms. In the late 1960s, he embarked on his Knots series, creating twisted sculptures in polyester and bronze that conveyed universal themes of unity and mutual understanding. This series includes Meeting Point at Schiphol Airport.
Meeting Point is a polyester knot placed in 1975 at the arrivals. At least at that time it was the arrivals. I believe now it's probably expanded a lot more, but that was the meeting point at the time, where people that would arrive at Schiphol could, meet their loved ones or family, and it had that function of connecting people. And his series of knots were also just more about that. He started his series of knots in 1967, initially as a sort of reaction to the growing mystification in the art world. This is in a time when you had like conceptual art movements and stuff where you almost had to be like a philosopher to understand, work that you were seeing. You had to understand all these theories and all these concepts to, gauge what you were looking at. And Shinkichi wanted to create something that, was like a direct statement that anyone around the world, would have a direct association or connection to seeing the work. And so he chose the knot as a symbol for this idea. And he said a knot is an object that you could place anywhere in the world, from the jungle in Brazil to Los Angeles. People will have an association. You don't have to like art or have an idea of art history to have an association with this. The functional sort of aspect of it being a object of connection, of course, was, I think, very important to him. And it was also designed to be very site specific. So the knot's also wrapped around a column at Schiphol. So it couldn't have been placed anywhere else. It's not like a sculpture that could be moved and, placed in the hall somewhere. Or Shinkichi very specifically designed this to be at that location in Schiphol. So it's connection to, like I said, the Schiphol itself, but also then the, sort of the function it has within the space, I think is very well thought of.
Shakura's childhood was defined by his close proximity to Shinkichi and his art, as the family lived in a home that was itself an ongoing work of creative expression. With walls covered in Shinkichi's designs and studios dedicated to his sculptures, the castle in Barlow was a place where Shakura learned firsthand the depth of his grandfather's artistry. Growing up in this environment, he developed a profound connection to the legacy of his grandfather, experiencing both his art and his life's work up close.
But so everything revolved around Shinkichi and his work, and while I was growing up, we would always go to the openings of exhibitions, and we would always join, we would help in all the preparation that would go into, creating these like publications and stuff like that. So we were very much involved as a family as a whole with Shinkichi and his career. And so my parents and my sister and I, we lived at one side of the castle, and the other side was my grandfather, my grandmother, and then his assistant. And so the 7 of us were like this little tribe. Of course, very special, but also something I learned to appreciate a lot more when I got older.
An exhibition is more than just a collection of artworks. It's a story, a journey, a way to connect the past and present. In 2023, to honor Shinkichi Tajiri's 100th anniversary, Shakura and his sister Tanea delved deep into their family history for a major retrospective. 2.5 years of preparation and research uncovered not only new insights, but also emotions and memories.
Yeah, so my sister and I curated and designed an exhibition called Shinkichi Tajiri, The Restless Wanderer, at the Bonnefante in Maastricht. This was in 2023. It opened, for my grandfather's centennial, and the idea was actually to show his story sort of through the eyes of his grandchildren. It took us about 2.5 years, I think, of preparation, of going through the archives, researching our family history. Of course, we knew the story of Shinkichi and Ferdi and our family, but once you start sort of making a publication or an exhibition, you revisit all of the stories and all of this stuff with a completely different sort of intention. And we're also unlocking the archive right now as an estate. And so we also found a lot of new information, and it was just very therapeutic for us to, as a family, to sort of go through everything that happened and reflect on how we all got here in the first place, and its impact on us.
The knot is more than just a sculpture. It represents the ties between Shinkichi's past, the concept of heritage, and the enduring influence of family. A timeless image of unity across generations and cultures. The knot is always intertwining, and Here's something to think about, dear listener. Aren't we all a knot of our past and present, made up of our happy moments, hardships, and everything in between?
In these polarizing times, the knot, like I just mentioned, is a symbol of connection, of bringing people together. From that perspective, I feel like it's more relevant than ever. The knot was a form of connecting people, but it was also this sort of, it had this unsolvability, it had this sort of mysterious, sort of almost Zen-like quality to it, where it was very complex in its simplicity. And it was also, I think, for Shinkichi, it was also a connection between East and West, at least, how, we might see it like, his struggle with, growing up, in this sort of dichotomy between these two worlds. It was, for him probably also a way to tie these things together. And I hope that the knot, as a symbol and as a, work of art can do that as well in these times, where it can bring people from different backgrounds, creeds, whatever, together, and be a form of connection.
As Schiphol, Shinkichi Tajiri's knot serves as a meeting point, but not just for the lost traveler. No, the sculpture wrapped around the column is a meeting point of culture and history. Mirroring his own life and being, Shinkichi Tajiri's artworks are bridges, uniting East and West, past and present, himself and his grandson Shakuru. Today, his knot stands as a reminder that even in our differences, we are all connected. Thank you for listening to this episode of Art Moments Schiphol. Curious about other artworks at Schiphol? Check out the other episodes in this series, like the Delart, a massive standing drawing of Schiphol's pioneer, Jan Delart, made by Jeroen Henneman. I wish you a pleasant journey.